A courtroom filled with laughter, a judge smirking from his high seat, and an old man standing alone, humiliated in front of everyone. To them, he was just another case, another name on a long list of people wasting the court's time. But what no one realized was that this man wasn't just anyone. The judge leaned forward, shaking his head in frustration. "You think you can ignore the law just because you're old?" His voice was sharp, his words cutting deep. The courtroom chuckled, entertained by the display of power. The old man, however, didn't argue. He didn't plead. Instead, he sighed, reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out an old phone. With hands that had seen decades of hard work, he pressed a number. The room grew quiet. Then, in a steady voice, he spoke just 4 words. "Son, I need you." And on the other end of the line, the voice that answered would change everything. The courtroom was grand, intimidating. High ceilings, polished wooden benches, and a judge's bench that loomed over the room like a throne. It was a place where power was displayed, where words carried weight, and where respect was often determined by status. Among the well-dressed attorneys and sharp-eyed legal professionals, the old man stood out. His suit was worn, his hands slightly unsteady, and his tired eyes carried the weight of years. He wasn't here for a serious crime, just a minor legal issue, maybe an unpaid fine or a small dispute. Nothing that should have warranted humiliation. Yet, from the moment he stepped forward, the judge's disinterest was obvious. He barely looked up as he flipped through paperwork. "Let's get this over with," he muttered, his tone dismissive. The room was filled with people who saw the old man as insignificant, a nobody, just another person wasting the court's time. They didn't know his story. They didn't know who he really was. And they certainly didn't know that, in just a few minutes, this man, who they had mocked and dismissed, would turn their world upside down with a single phone call. The judge sighed loudly, tapping his fingers against the bench. "Do you even understand why you're here?" His tone was sharp, laced with impatience. The old man nodded slowly, his fingers gripping the edges of his coat. "Yes, Your Honor, but I—" The judge cut him off with a wave of his hand. "Enough. I don't need excuses. People like you think the rules don't apply to you just because of your age." A few quiet chuckles rippled through the courtroom. The old man remained silent, his expression unreadable. But the judge wasn't done. "Let me guess," he continued mockingly. "You didn't have the money? You didn't have the time? Or maybe you just didn't think this was important?" The old man's lips pressed together, his hands trembling slightly. "I tried," he said softly, "but they weren't easy." The judge scoffed. "Nothing is easy. That's life. You're not special." The words hit like a slap. The courtroom, filled with lawyers and spectators, watched in amusement. To them, this was entertainment, a display of power, a reminder that even the weak had to follow the rules. But then, something changed. The old man didn't plead, didn't argue. Instead, he let out a quiet sigh and reached into his pocket. He pulled out an old, scratched phone, dialed a number, and lifted it to his ear. The laughter faded. The room tensed. Then, in a calm, steady voice, he said 4 words that would turn the entire courtroom upside down. "Son, I need you." The courtroom fell into an uneasy silence. The old man's voice had been soft, but the confidence in his tone was impossible to ignore. He wasn't pleading, he wasn't desperate. He was simply making a call. The phone rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, "Dad, what's wrong?" The words were calm, steady, but there was something about them that sent a ripple through the air. The judge rolled his eyes. "Oh, fantastic. Calling for help now? What, did you call your lawyer?" He chuckled, shaking his head. A few people smirked, convinced that the old man was grasping at straws. But the old man didn't respond. Instead, he calmly extended the phone toward the bailiff. "He wants to talk to you." The bailiff hesitated. Then, cautiously, he took the phone. "Hello?" The moment he heard the voice on the other end, his entire posture changed. His back straightened, his face paled, and his grip on the phone tightened. "Yes, sir. He's standing right here." He turned to the judge, lowering his voice to a whisper. The judge's smirk faded. "You're joking," he muttered. The bailiff swallowed hard. "No, sir. It's real. It's Elon Musk." The entire courtroom went still. The once amused spectators shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The judge, so confident just moments ago, suddenly looked very, very small. And as he slowly reached for the phone, the weight of what he had just done finally began to sink in. The judge hesitated before lifting the phone to his ear. The arrogance he had displayed moments ago was gone. His fingers twitched slightly as he adjusted his robe, clearing his throat. Mr. Musk?" The voice on the other end was calm, but unmistakably firm. "That man you just humiliated? That's my father." A heavy silence filled the room. The spectators who had been laughing minutes ago now sat frozen. The judge swallowed hard, his confidence crumbling. "Mr. Musk, I didn't realize—" "No, you didn't," Musk cut in. "And that's the problem, isn't it?" The judge shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing around the room as if looking for an escape. The courtroom, once his stage, now felt suffocating. "I meant no real harm," he stammered. Musk's voice remained steady. "Harm isn't just physical, it's how you make people feel. You used your power to belittle someone who didn't deserve it. Tell me, Judge, would you have treated him the same if you knew who he was from the start?" The judge had no answer, because in that moment he knew the truth, and so did everyone else in the room. The judge's throat went dry. He shifted in his seat, gripping the edge of his bench. "This was all just a misunderstanding," he muttered, forcing a weak smile. Musk didn't need to argue. He didn't need to raise his voice. The weight of his words had already shifted the entire room. The people who had once laughed at the old man now sat in silence, watching as their once powerful judge struggled to recover. The old man stood quietly, watching. He hadn't needed his son to fight his battles, but now that he had, there was nothing left to say. The judge adjusted his robe, straightened his papers, and cleared his throat. His voice, which once held arrogance, now carried something else, shame. "Case dismissed," he said quickly, barely looking up. The old man nodded, took his phone back, and walked out of the courtroom, this time with his dignity intact. The old man didn't look back as he stepped out of the courtroom. He didn't need to. The silence behind him spoke louder than any words ever could. Just minutes ago, he had been treated as insignificant, mocked by a judge who thought power meant belittling those beneath him. But now, the judge sat frozen, his authority shattered with a single phone call. News of the incident spread quickly. People whispered about how a man who ruled the courtroom with arrogance had been humbled in front of everyone. But the real question lingered in the air. Why did it take power to demand respect? Would the judge have treated the old man differently if he had known who his son was from the start? Or should respect be given freely, not because of status or wealth, but because it's simply the right thing to do? Elon Musk never set foot in that courtroom. He didn't have to. His words alone had been enough to flip the balance of power. But the lesson wasn't just for the judge. It was for everyone. Because sometimes the person you underestimate today might just be connected to someone who will make you regret it tomorrow.